My son was silent for 2 weeks after our argument, so I came to his door looking for answers. The door was closed, so I looked through his window. What I saw destroyed my world, making my legs tremble and my heart beat faster. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The kitchen door slammed against the wall with such force that my reading glasses nearly slipped off my nose. Martin burst in like a tornado, his designer jacket wrinkled and his eyes wild with desperation. "Dad, I need 15,000 immediately." His voice cracked with urgency. "This is an investment opportunity that can't wait." I set down the utility bill I'd been reviewing and looked at my son. 35 years old, wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, yet standing there with his hand extended like a child demanding allowance. "Son, you said the same thing last time." I kept my voice steady, measured. "Where's that money? The 8,000 you promised to pay back within 2 months?" Martin began pacing between the kitchen counter and the table where I sat. His expensive shoes clicked against the linoleum with each agitated step. "This is different. It's a whole other situation." He gestured wildly, nearly knocking over the salt shaker. "There's this developer in San Francisco who needs investors for a tech startup. Guaranteed returns within 6 weeks. The papers spread across my table told a different story. Electric bill 2 months behind. Property taxes due next week. My pension covered the basics, but barely. Martin's previous guaranteed returns had evaporated like morning fog. "I'm not an ATM, Martin." I removed my glasses and cleaned them slowly, deliberately. "Earn it yourself." His face flushed red. The pacing stopped abruptly. "You stingy old man!" Martin's fist crashed down on the table, sending bills scattering to the floor. "You're sitting on a pile of money while I'm trying to build something real." I remained seated, watching my son transform into someone I barely recognized. This wasn't the boy Ellen had raised with gentle hands and firm principles. Building something. I picked up the fallen papers one by one. Like that restaurant venture that lasted 3 months? Or the online marketing scheme that took your cousin's money too? Martin grabbed the back of the chair across from me, his knuckles white with tension. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the kitchen window illuminated the desperation etched across his features. "You don't understand modern business." His voice pitched higher, more frantic. "These opportunities don't wait for old-fashioned thinking." I stood slowly, my joints protesting after sitting hunched over bills for 2 hours. At 68, I'd learned to recognize the difference between opportunity and delusion. "What I understand is responsibility." I met his gaze directly. "Something your mother tried to teach both of us." The mention of Ellen hit him like a physical blow. Martin's shoulders sagged momentarily before rage replaced the brief vulnerability. "Don't bring Mom into this." He kicked the chair away from the table. It toppled backward, clattering against the refrigerator. "She would have supported my dreams. Your mother would have told you to get a job." Martin's laugh held no humor, only bitter resentment. He moved toward the kitchen door, then spun back to face me with wild eyes. "You think you're teaching me some lesson, you stingy old fool?" His voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "I'll take what belongs to me, one way or another." The kitchen fell silent except for the steady tick of the wall clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Martin stared at me for a long moment, his chest heaving with anger and desperation. Then he was gone, the door slamming behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. I stood alone in my kitchen, looking at the overturned chair and scattered bills, feeling the weight of 35 years of fatherhood pressing down on my shoulders. The overturned chair lay on its side like a fallen soldier, one leg pointing accusingly toward the ceiling. I stared at it for several minutes before finally reaching down to set it upright. The impact had left a small scuff mark on the refrigerator door. Ellen's voice echoed in my memory as I gathered the scattered bills from the floor. "Arnold, if you give him everything without effort, he'll never learn to value work." She'd said that when Martin was 16, asking for a car without having earned a single dollar. I straightened slowly, my lower back protesting the movement. The kitchen felt too quiet now, as if Martin's explosive presence had somehow filled a space I hadn't realized was empty. The wall clock ticked steadily, marking time that felt suspended between conflict and resolution. Walking to the living room, I settled into my worn leather recliner. Ellen's photograph sat on the side table, her smile frozen in eternal optimism. 37 years of marriage, and she'd never once seen me waver in a decision about Martin. But she'd never seen him this desperate either. Had I been too harsh? The question gnawed at me as I picked up her picture, running my thumb along the silver frame. Martin's eyes had held something beyond anger today, genuine fear. Fear of what? I couldn't say, but it was there beneath the rage and entitlement. The afternoon light slanted through the living room windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor Ellen had insisted we install back in 1998. She'd saved for 2 years to afford it, working extra shifts at the hospital while I managed the construction crew that would eventually lay those very boards. Love without boundaries harms the child, she used to say. Ellen had been the disciplinarian when Martin was young, while I'd been the one wanting to give him everything we'd never had. She'd stopped me then, just as she would stop me now. But Ellen wasn't here to confirm my choices. She wasn't here to see her son wearing $1,000 jackets while begging for money, like a stranger on the street. I set the photograph back down and walked to the basement door. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I descended into the cool darkness below. The musty smell of concrete and old wood filled my nostrils, familiar and somehow comforting. Near the furnace, beneath the loose floorboards I'd never quite gotten around to fixing properly, lay my real savings. Not the modest checking account Martin knew about, but the cash Ellen and I had squirreled away over decades. $43,000 in neat bundles, wrapped in plastic bags to keep the moisture out. Emergency money. Money for medical bills, home repairs, or genuine crises. Not for investment schemes or designer clothes or whatever desperate fantasy Martin was chasing this week. I didn't remove the boards or count the money. Just knowing it was there, safe from Martin's impulsiveness, gave me the reassurance I needed. Ellen had trusted me to protect their future. I wouldn't fail that trust now, even if it meant watching my son struggle. The stairs groaned again as I climbed back to the main floor. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Patterson watering her garden next door, her movements slow and methodical. She'd been Ellen's closest friend, had held my hand at the funeral, while I tried not to collapse under the weight of sudden solitude. Maybe I should call Martin, apologize for being harsh, explain that love sometimes required saying no. But as I reached for the phone, Ellen's voice whispered in my memory again. He has to learn, Arnold. He has to learn before it's too late. I let my hand fall back to my side and walked upstairs to my bedroom. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, I would trust that 35 years of trying to raise Martin right had planted seeds that might still grow, even in the rocky soil of his current desperation. The house settled around me with familiar sounds, the whisper of wind through the eaves, the distant murmur of traffic on J Street, the soft tick of clocks marking time in empty rooms. The next morning I reached for my phone before I'd even finished my first sip of coffee. Martin's number was already highlighted in my contacts, ready to dial. Surely he'd cooled down overnight. Surely we could talk like reasonable adults. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. His recorded voice sounded younger somehow, more optimistic than the desperate man who'd stood in my kitchen yesterday. Martin, it's Dad. Call me back when you get this. We should talk. I hung up and continued with my morning routine. Shower, breakfast, reading the Sacramento Bee online. But every few minutes my eyes drifted to the phone screen, waiting for it to light up with an incoming call. Nothing. That evening I tried again while watching the news. Then again before bed. Each unanswered ring felt heavier than the last. By Thursday I'd left 3 voicemails and sent 2 text messages. Son, let's talk. Maybe we can find a compromise. The words looked pathetic on the small screen, like desperate negotiations with someone who held all the cards. Friday brought rain and continued silence. I checked Martin's social media accounts for the first time in months, scrolling through photos of restaurant meals and scenic drives that dated back to early March. Nothing recent. Nothing that explained where he might be or why he wouldn't return a simple phone call. Saturday morning, I paced from kitchen to living room to kitchen again, phone in hand. The silence was becoming something physical, a presence that filled the empty spaces of my house. Mrs. Patterson waved from her garden, and I forced a smile, wondering if she could see the worry etched across my face. My afternoon routine of attempted contact had developed its own rhythm. First, a phone call. Let it ring 8 times. No more, no less. Then wait an hour, send a text message. Wait another hour. Check his social media. Repeat. Sunday brought desperate measures. I scrolled through Martin's contact list on my old phone, looking for numbers I recognized. Jake Morrison, Martin's friend from high school, now working at a tech company downtown. They'd stayed in touch over the years, sometimes going out for drinks or watching Giants games together. Jake answered on the second ring. "Mr. Rogers, is everything okay?" "Jake, have you seen Martin lately? I've been trying to reach him all week." A pause. Then, "Actually, Mr. Rogers, I've been looking for him too. He borrowed $500 from me last month. Said he'd pay it back by now. His phone's been going straight to voicemail for days." My stomach dropped. "When did you last see him?" "Tuesday morning. He seemed stressed about something, said he had a big meeting that afternoon. That's the last I heard from him." Tuesday. The day he'd stormed out of my kitchen, threatening to take what belonged to him. I thanked Jake and hung up, then immediately dialed Martin's number again. This time, it didn't even ring. Straight to voicemail as if the phone was dead or turned off. Monday brought a new level of anxiety. I found myself checking my phone every few minutes, scrolling through our text conversation, looking for clues I might have missed. His last message to me was from 2 weeks ago. "Thanks for the birthday money, Dad. I'll put it to good use." Tuesday marked 1 full week since our confrontation. I stood in the same spot in my kitchen where Martin had overturned the chair, trying to replay every word he'd spoken. "I'll take what belongs to me one way or another." What had he meant by that? What did he think belonged to him? Wednesday evening I sat in Ellen's chair, something I rarely did, and stared at my silent phone. 7 days without a word from my only child. Even during his worst phases, his messiest breakups, his failed business ventures, Martin had never gone completely silent. He'd always needed something, always found a reason to call. The house felt different now, charged with a tension I couldn't name. Every creak of the floorboards made me look up, hoping to see Martin's familiar silhouette in the doorway. Every car door slamming in the street made my heart race, thinking he might be coming home to apologize. But he wasn't coming home. Something was wrong, something beyond our argument about money. I could feel it in the unnatural quiet of my phone, in the complete absence of his digital footprints, in the way Jake's voice had carried its own note of concern. Thursday morning, I made a decision that had been building for days. I would drive to Martin's apartment. Face to face, we could resolve whatever had driven this wedge between us. Father to son, we could find our way back to the relationship Ellen would have wanted us to maintain. I finished my coffee, grabbed my keys from the hook by the kitchen door, and headed for my truck. The morning air was crisp and clear, perfect driving weather. Whatever was happening with Martin, whatever had caused this silence, I would find answers today. The engine turned over on the first try, and I backed out of my driveway with purpose. One way or another, this silence would end today. Friday morning brought the same ritual. Coffee at the kitchen table, phone in hand. Martin's number highlighted it on the screen. 9 days now since our confrontation. 8 days since his last trace of communication anywhere. My thumb hovered over the call button, knowing what I'd hear. The same mechanical voice telling me the customer was unavailable. This time, I didn't press it. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found Jake Morrison's number. If Martin was avoiding me, maybe he'd confided in his friend. Maybe Jake knew something that could ease the growing knot in my stomach. Jake answered on the third ring, sounding groggy. "Mr. Rogers, everything okay?" "Jake, I'm sorry to call so early. Have you seen Martin in the past few weeks? I've been trying to reach him and—" I paused, not wanting to sound like a paranoid parent. "He's not returning calls." Silence stretched between us for several heartbeats. When Jake spoke again, his voice carried a different tone. Cautious, almost embarrassed. "Actually, Mr. Rogers, I've been looking for him too. He borrowed $500 from me last month. Said it was temporary, just until some design project paid out." Jake cleared his throat. His phone's been going straight to voicemail for over a week. My coffee grew cold as Jake's words sank in. 500 from Jake. 15,000 demanded from me. Who else had Martin approached? How deep were his financial troubles? When did you last see him face to face? Tuesday morning. April 8th, I think. He seemed stressed about something, kept checking his phone. Said he had an important meeting that afternoon. Jake hesitated. Mr. Rogers, is Martin okay? This isn't like him to just disappear. Tuesday. The day he'd stormed out of my kitchen, threatening to take what belonged to him. After thanking Jake, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the cold coffee and feeling the weight of 9 days pressing down on me. Ellen's photograph smiled at me from the living room, but even her memory couldn't provide the guidance I needed now. Enough. Whatever was happening with Martin, whatever trouble he'd gotten himself into, I needed to see him face to face. I'd driven to his Oak Park rental twice before. Once when he first moved in, once to help him fix a leaky faucet. The address was still in my phone from when I'd picked him up for Christmas dinner. I found my keys on the hook by the kitchen door, checked that I had Martin's address, and grabbed my wallet. The morning was clear and warm, typical California spring weather, perfect for a drive across Sacramento to confront whatever was keeping my son in hiding. The garage door rumbled open, and I backed my truck onto the quiet street. Mrs. Patterson was already tending her roses, and she waved as I pulled away. I wondered what she'd think if she knew where I was going, what I suspected about Martin's situation. Traffic was light heading west toward Oak Park. I'd worked construction in that neighborhood back in the 80s, when the area was transitioning from farmland to suburban development. Now it was a mixed bag, some streets well maintained, others showing the wear of economic decline. Martin Street was Elm Avenue, about 20 minutes from downtown if traffic cooperated. I'd memorized the route during my previous visits, though I'd never paid close attention to the neighborhood itself. Today I drove with different eyes, seeing the area where my son had chosen to live, wondering what it revealed about his state of mind. The radio played softly as I navigated familiar streets, my hands steady on the wheel despite the anxiety building in my chest. Whatever I found at Martin's house, whatever explanation he had for 9 days of silence, we'd work through it together, father and son, the way Ellen would have wanted. Oak Park appeared ahead, a grid of modest houses and apartment complexes. I slowed down, checking street signs, preparing for whatever conversation awaited me. Elm Avenue stretched before me like a lesson in urban decay. Some houses maintained neat lawns and fresh paint, while others surrendered to neglect and broken dreams. Martin's address, 2247, sat squarely in the declining category. I parked 4 houses down, the only available space on the crowded street. Walking toward Martin's rental, I couldn't reconcile the chaos before me with the son who once obsessed over perfectly aligned pencils and color-coordinated clothing. The front yard looked abandoned, waist-high weeds choking what had once been flower beds, a rusted lawn mower tilting sideways near the porch steps. The house itself wore neglect like a threadbare coat. Paint peeled from the wooden siding in long strips, and the front porch sagged under the weight of accumulated junk. Newspapers in plastic bags created a small mountain by the door, some yellowed with age and weather. I climbed the 3 concrete steps, avoiding a board that looked ready to collapse, and knocked firmly on the front door. The sound echoed hollowly, followed by silence. I knocked again, harder this time, listening for any movement inside. Nothing. Walking around the house's perimeter, I noted broken fence slats and an overflowing garbage can that attracted flies in lazy circles. The side windows were grimy, their glass so dirty that seeing inside was nearly impossible, but I could hear something. Voices, muffled but definitely present. The living room window faced the neighbor's driveway, partially concealed by an overgrown hedge. I moved closer, careful to stay low, and pressed my ear near the glass. 2 distinct voices drifted through the thin walls, one unmistakably Martin's. "Been over this 3 times already, Luther. The timeline has to be perfect." Luther? I'd never heard Martin mention anyone named Luther. My son's voice sounded different, harder somehow, with a cold calculation I didn't recognize. "Friday afternoons are ideal," Martin continued. "He goes to the gym religiously at 2 o'clock. Never misses it, never varies the schedule. We'll have at least 90 minutes, probably 2 hours." They were discussing someone's schedule, Someone who went to the gym on Friday afternoons. My gym routine had been the same for 15 years. Every Friday at 2 o'clock, like clockwork. Ellen used to tease me about my rigid schedule, calling it Arnold's sacred gym time. I crouched lower, positioning myself where I could hear clearly while remaining hidden. The hedge scratched against my jacket, but I barely noticed. Something cold was forming in my stomach as Martin's words continued to filter through the wall. The money's definitely there, right? This second voice, Luther, spoke with measured calm, like someone discussing a business transaction. Absolutely. 43,000 in cash, maybe more. The old man doesn't trust banks. Keeps everything hidden in the basement under loose floorboards near the furnace. I watched him check it dozens of times over the years. My heart stopped. $43,000. The exact amount Ellen and I had saved over 3 decades of careful budgeting and sacrifice. Money that Martin knew about because he'd lived in that house for 18 years, because I'd trusted him with our family's financial security. Keys? Luther asked, his voice clinical and professional. Flower pot by the front door. Same place for 20 years. He's predictable that way. The hedge seemed to press closer as the full implications crashed over me. Martin wasn't missing. He wasn't in trouble. He was planning to rob me, his own father. Every detail of our home's security, every habit I'd maintained for decades, was being catalogued and shared with this stranger. I fumbled for my phone with trembling fingers, somehow managing to activate the recording app. Evidence. I needed evidence of what I was hearing, proof that this nightmare was real. Security system? Luther's questions continued with mechanical precision. None. He thinks living in East Sacramento makes him safe. Neighbors mind their own business, and the closest house is 30 feet away through Ellen's old garden. Even my dead wife's memory was being weaponized against me. I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood, forcing myself to remain silent while my world collapsed around me. Through the dirty glass, I caught glimpses of movement inside. Papers spread across a table. Martin's familiar silhouette gesturing at what looked like floor plans. My floor plans. My house laid bare for a criminal's convenience. The conversation continued, each detail another knife in my back. My grocery shopping schedule. The location of spare house keys. Which neighbors traveled frequently. Everything a professional thief would need to clean out my life savings while I sweated through my Friday workout routine. I crept backward from the window, my phone still recording, my hands shaking with rage and betrayal. 35 years of fatherhood, of trying to raise Martin with Ellen's values and my own sense of responsibility, had led to this moment. My own son selling me out to a stranger for money he was too lazy to earn. The voices faded as I moved toward the street, but their words echoed in my mind with perfect clarity. My son, my only child, was planning to rob me blind, and based on their timeline discussion, it was happening soon. Very soon. Pressing myself against the exterior wall beneath the living room window, I steadied my phone and adjusted the recording app's sensitivity. Every word needed to be captured, every detail preserved. What I'd already heard was damning enough, but Luther's methodical questions suggested this conversation was far from over. Walk me through the approach again, Luther said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to planning crimes, from parking to entry. Martin's response chilled me to the bone. Park 3 blocks away on J Street near the coffee shop. Walk through the neighborhood like you belong there. White guy in work clothes won't attract attention in East Sacramento. Approach from the back alley. Grab the keys from under the flower pot. Cameras? None visible. The old man's too trusting, too stuck in the past to worry about modern security. Too trusting. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't destroying my faith in everything I'd believed about my son. I'd raised him to be honorable, to work for what he wanted, to respect other people's property. Ellen and I had modeled integrity every day of his childhood. Once inside, Luther prompted, and I heard papers rustling as if they were consulting written plans. Straight to the basement. Wooden stairs, 17 steps. They creak, but the neighbors are far enough away that it doesn't matter. The furnace is against the east wall, loose floorboards about 3 feet to the left. Money's wrapped in plastic bags, organized in bundles of thousands. My legs trembled as Martin described the hiding place Ellen and I had chosen together after her cancer diagnosis. We'd wanted cash available for medical emergencies, for final expenses, for security in an uncertain world. Now our precaution was funding our son's betrayal. How sure are you about the amount? Luther's professionalism was almost more disturbing than Martin's casual betrayal. Minimum 40,000, probably closer to 50. The old man's been stashing money there for decades. Every bonus from his construction jobs, every tax refund, birthday money from relatives, everything went into those floorboards. Through the dirty window glass, I caught a clearer glimpse of their setup. Martin sat at a folding table covered with papers, photographs, hand-drawn maps, what appeared to be a typed schedule. Luther remained partially hidden, but I could see his hands gesturing as he asked questions, his movements economical and precise. Exit strategy. Luther continued his systematic interrogation. Same route in reverse. Back door to alley, alley to J Street, normal walking pace. The whole thing should take 15 minutes, 20 at most. By the time the old man gets home from the gym, counts his money and realizes what happened, we're long gone. And afterward? Martin's laugh contained no warmth, no recognition of the magnitude of his betrayal. Afterward, I visit my grieving father, help him through this terrible violation of his home, play the supportive son while he files police reports and changes locks. Who would suspect? His own child. The recording app showed 12 minutes of audio captured, 12 minutes of evidence that my son had sold out his family, his upbringing, his mother's memory, for money he was too proud or too lazy to earn through honest work. I needed visual evidence too. Shifting my position carefully, I raised myself just enough to peer through a clean section of window glass. The table was clearly visible now. Floor plans of my house drawn in Martin's familiar handwriting, photographs that looked like surveillance shots of my daily routines, even a typed document that appeared to list my weekly schedule. Luther came into view for the first time and my blood ran cold. Tall, lean, with the kind of predatory stillness that suggested violence was always an option. Prison tattoos decorated his forearms, and his eyes held the flat affect of someone who'd crossed moral lines so often that conscience no longer functioned. When? Luther asked, gathering the papers into a neat stack. Martin checked his phone. Today's Friday. Dad's at the gym right now, actually. But we need another week to finalize everything. Next Friday, April 25th. Same time, same routine. Next Friday. 7 days to decide how to respond to my son's ultimate betrayal. 7 days to figure out whether Arnold Rogers would be a victim or something else entirely. I lowered myself back down and crept away from the window, my phone heavy with evidence, my heart heavy with the knowledge that the boy Ellen and I had raised was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who saw his father not as family, but as a target. The walk back to my truck felt like moving through thick water, each step weighted with 35 years of shattered assumptions. I'd come here worried about Martin's welfare, prepared to help him through whatever crisis had caused his silence. Instead, I'd discovered that I was the crisis. I was the problem Martin was planning to solve with theft, betrayal, and the help of a man who looked like he'd killed before and would kill again if necessary. By the time I reached my truck, my hands had stopped shaking. The recording was safely stored on my phone, the evidence preserved. Now I had to decide what to do with it, what my legs carried me back to the truck on autopilot, while my mind struggled to process what I'd just witnessed. 35 years of fatherhood, reduced to surveillance footage and criminal conspiracy. The keys trembled in my hand as I unlocked the driver's door. The engine started with its familiar rumble, but nothing felt familiar anymore. My son, the boy Ellen had sung to sleep, the teenager I'd taught to drive in this very truck, was planning to rob me with a convicted felon. The audio recording sat heavy in my phone. 12 minutes of betrayal that would destroy what remained of our relationship forever. Traffic moved slowly through Oak Park's residential streets, giving me too much time to think. Every red light, every stop sign brought fresh waves of disbelief. Martin knew exactly where I hid my money, because I'd trusted him. He knew my schedule because I'd shared it freely, the way fathers do with their children. That trust was now weaponized against me. By the time I reached the freeway on-ramp, Shock was crystallizing into something harder, colder. The hurt remained, but underneath it grew a determination I hadn't felt since Ellen's funeral. Martin had made his choice. He'd chosen Luther Kane over his own father, chosen theft over honest work, chosen betrayal over family. Sacramento's skyline rose ahead as I merged into traffic. The familiar buildings looked different somehow, as if the city itself had shifted while I discovered my son's true nature. Radio chatter filled the silence, but I barely heard it over the replay of Martin's voice describing my house like a target to be conquered. The drive to East Sacramento took 40 minutes through midday traffic. 40 minutes to accept that the boy I'd raised was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who saw me not as a father, but as an obstacle between him and easy money. Mrs. Patterson was pruning her rose bushes when I pulled into my driveway. She waved cheerfully, completely unaware that her neighbor had just learned his own child was planning to rob him blind. I managed a weak wave in return before disappearing into my garage. Inside the house, everything looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. Coffee cup in the sink, bills organized on the kitchen table, Ellen's photograph smiling from the living room, but nothing felt the same. The house Martin had grown up in was now just a crime scene waiting to happen. I sat heavily at the kitchen table, pulling out my phone to listen to the recording again. Martin's voice came through clearly. The old man doesn't trust banks, keeps everything hidden in the basement. His casual dismissal of me as the old man hurt almost as much as the planned theft itself. But hurt was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not with a week until their planned robbery. Not with $43,000 hidden exactly where Martin described it to his criminal partner. The basement stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the cool darkness. The furnace hummed quietly in its corner, and the loose floorboards looked innocent enough. But Martin knew every detail of this hiding place. He described it perfectly to Luther Kane. Standing over my life savings, I made a decision that would have horrified the man I'd been that morning. The grieving father who'd driven to Oak Park, hoping to reconcile with his wayward son, was gone. In his place stood someone harder, someone who understood that Martin had declared war on his own family. If my son wanted to play criminal games, then I'd show him what happened when amateurs tried to victimize someone who'd spent 40 years building things that lasted. Someone who understood planning, preparation, and the value of thinking 3 steps ahead. Martin thought he was hunting easy prey. He was about to discover how wrong he could be. Saturday morning found me at my laptop before dawn, researching home security systems while my coffee grew cold. Sleep had been impossible after yesterday's discovery, but my mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. I had 6 days until Martin's planned robbery. 6 days to turn prey into predator. The internet offered countless options for surveillance equipment, motion-activated cameras, smartphone connectivity, cloud storage, night vision capabilities. My engineering background made the technical specifications easy to understand, but choosing the right system required careful consideration of Martin's planned approach. They expected to enter through the back door, move straight to the basement, and complete the theft within 20 minutes. Luther had asked about security systems, and Martin assured him there were none. That advantage was about to disappear. By 9 o'clock, I'd identified the perfect setup. 4 wireless cameras with smartphone monitoring, motion detection, and automatic recording to cloud storage. Professional installation would take days, but I'd been mounting equipment in challenging locations for 40 years. This job would be straightforward by comparison. Best Buy opened at 10, and I was waiting in the parking lot when the first employee unlocked the doors. The electronics section buzzed with weekend shoppers, but I headed straight to the security department where a young clerk named David greeted me with practiced enthusiasm. "Morning, sir. Looking to upgrade your home security? I need a complete surveillance system that I can monitor from my phone in real time." I handed him the printed specifications I'd prepared. 4 cameras, wireless connectivity, and simple installation for someone with basic technical skills. David studied my list with growing respect. "You've done your homework, sir. This system here matches your requirements perfectly." He pointed to a display model featuring sleek white cameras and a tablet showing multiple views. Wi-Fi enabled, motion alerts sent directly to your smartphone, and 2-week cloud storage included. Battery backup, 8 hours minimum on each camera. The app gives you live viewing, recorded playback, and you can even communicate through the built-in speakers if needed. Perfect. Within an hour, I'd purchased everything necessary to transform my house into a fortress of evidence. 4 cameras, mounting hardware, charging cables, and a premium cloud storage subscription that would preserve everything for legal proceedings. The drive home took 15 minutes, and I spent another 30 reading installation manuals, while eating a sandwich at my kitchen table. The cameras were surprisingly sophisticated, each unit no larger than a deck of cards, with magnetic mounting bases and adjustable viewing angles. Installation began with the front door camera, positioned to capture anyone approaching from the street or driveway. The magnetic mount attached easily to the metal door frame, and the Wi-Fi connection established within minutes. The smartphone app showed a crystal clear view of my front porch in real time. Camera 2 went in the kitchen, angled to monitor the back door and main living area. Martin's planned entry route would be captured from the moment he touched the door handle. Camera 3 covered the basement stairs. Anyone descending toward my hidden money would be recorded from multiple angles. The 4th camera required careful positioning. I wanted complete coverage of the basement area where Martin expected to find $43,000 in neatly organized bundles. The corner mount provided a perfect view of the furnace area and loose floorboards. By 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon, my house was transformed into a high-tech surveillance center. Every camera transmitted clearly to my phone. Motion detection was calibrated perfectly, and the cloud storage system was backing up everything automatically. I tested each unit systematically, walking through the house while monitoring myself on the smartphone screen. The image quality was remarkable, clear enough to identify faces, sharp enough to read documents, comprehensive enough to provide irrefutable evidence of criminal activity. Sitting in my kitchen with all 4 camera views displayed on my phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Ellen's death: complete confidence in my ability to control a challenging situation. Martin thought he was planning the perfect crime. Instead, he was walking into the perfect trap. But surveillance was only the first step. Evidence gathering would be meaningless without proper law enforcement involvement. Tomorrow, I would visit the Sacramento Police Department and establish the partnership that would transform Martin's planned robbery into his final mistake. Sunday morning's drive to the Sacramento Police Department felt different from my previous trip to Oak Park. Instead of driving toward uncertainty and betrayal, I was heading toward justice and resolution. The manila folder beside me contained printed photographs of Martin's robbery plans, technical specifications for my surveillance system, and a detailed timeline of events. Detective Sarah Miller had agreed to meet with me after I'd called the department's non-emergency number and explained the situation. Conspiracy to commit burglary involving family members was serious enough to warrant weekend attention, especially with audio evidence and a confirmed date for the planned crime. The police station parking lot was nearly empty at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Inside, the desk sergeant directed me to interview room B, where Detective Miller was waiting with a coffee cup and a legal pad covered in preliminary notes. "Mr. Rogers, thank you for coming in. I've reviewed your initial report, but I'd like to hear the complete story in your own words." Detective Miller appeared to be in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back professionally and eyes that suggested decades of experience with family crimes. Her manner was courteous, but thorough, someone who'd learned to verify every detail before committing resources to any operation. I started with Martin's explosive demand for money 2 weeks ago, his subsequent disappearance, and my discovery of his deteriorating living situation. When I reached the part about overhearing his conversation with Luther Kane, Detective Miller leaned forward with renewed interest. "You recorded this conversation?" 12 minutes of detailed planning. Martin describes my house layout, security measures, daily routine, and the exact location of $43,000 in cash. I handed her my phone with the audio file queued up. That's my son's voice discussing how to rob his own father. Detective Miller listened to the entire recording without interruption, making notes as Martin's voice described the planned crime in methodical detail. When it finished, she replayed several sections, focusing on specific threats and timeline elements. Mr. Rogers, this recording clearly establishes conspiracy to commit burglary, possibly grand theft depending on the amount involved. You're absolutely certain this is your son's voice? Detective, I've been listening to that voice for 35 years. I'd recognize it anywhere. She nodded, then examined the photographs I'd taken through Martin's window. The floor plans of my house, written schedules of my activities, and notes about key locations created a compelling visual narrative that corroborated the audio evidence. The planned date is this coming Friday? Friday afternoon at 2:30. Martin knows I go to the gym every Friday at 2 o'clock. They expect 90 minutes to complete the theft and disappear. Detective Miller closed her notepad and leaned back in her chair, studying me with professional assessment. Mr. Rogers, what exactly are you proposing? How do you want us to handle this situation? I want them arrested in the act. I've installed surveillance cameras throughout my house, and I can coordinate with your officers to ensure everything is documented properly. Let them break in, let them find the money, then arrest them with complete evidence. That's unusually proactive for a victim of planned family crime. Detective Miller, my son made his choice when he decided to treat me like a target instead of his father. I'm simply making mine. She spent another hour reviewing procedures, evidence requirements, and legal considerations. The operation would require careful coordination, officers positioned, but hidden, communication protocols established, and my role clearly defined to ensure both safety and evidence integrity. Mr. Rogers, you understand this will likely result in serious criminal charges against your son? Burglary, conspiracy, possibly additional charges depending on what we discover about this Luther Kane individual. I understand completely. Martin chose this path despite every opportunity to make different decisions. I won't be victimized by my own child. By the time I left the police station, Detective Miller had committed to the operation. Friday afternoon would bring plainclothes officers, coordinated surveillance, and the end of Martin's criminal career before it could properly begin. I drove home knowing that justice, not just revenge, would be served. The surveillance cameras greeted me with their steady electronic eyes as I entered my house. 4 days remained until Martin's planned robbery, 4 days to finalize preparations and ensure that every detail of his betrayal would be captured, documented, and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. At 1:45 p.m. on Friday, April 25th, I performed my final system check. All 4 cameras showed clear images on my phone screen. Motion detection was active, and Detective Miller had confirmed that unmarked units were positioned throughout the neighborhood. 7 days of preparation had led to this moment. The kitchen clock showed 1:50 as I gathered my gym bag and keys, making sure to follow my normal Friday routine exactly. Luther would be watching, timing my departure, confirming that the schedule Martin had provided was accurate. I couldn't disappoint him. I opened the front door with deliberate visibility, tossed my gym bag into the truck bed, and backed out of the driveway with the same casual movements I'd performed every Friday for 15 years. In my rearview mirror, the house looked peaceful and vulnerable, exactly the way Luther expected it to appear. The coffee shop on J Street provided perfect surveillance positioning 3 blocks from my house. I parked facing east, giving me clear sight lines while keeping my phone screen hidden from casual observers. At exactly 2:05 p.m., I opened my surveillance app and watched 4 camera feeds simultaneously. Detective Miller's voice crackled through my phone speaker at 2:12. Mr. Rogers, are you in position? Affirmative. All cameras are active and recording. No movement yet, but he should be approaching soon. Copy that. We're maintaining distance until we get visual confirmation of entry. My screen showed empty rooms and quiet hallways for another 10 minutes. Then, at 2:23, motion detection triggered on the backdoor camera. A tall figure in dark clothing appeared at my kitchen door, exactly as Martin had promised Luther it would happen. Luther moved with professional confidence, producing lockpicks from his jacket pocket and working the backdoor mechanism with practiced efficiency. Within 90 seconds, he was inside my kitchen, looking around with the casual assessment of someone who'd done this many times before. Detective Miller, I whispered into my phone. He's inside. Backdoor entry, just as we expected. Roger, We see him on your feed, continuing surveillance until he reaches the basement. The kitchen camera tracked Luther's movements as he oriented himself using the floor plans Martin had provided. He moved directly toward the basement door, ignoring the television, electronics, and other items that might tempt a less focused criminal. The basement stairs camera captured Luther's descent in perfect detail. Each step was recorded, his face clearly visible under the overhead light I'd left burning for exactly this purpose. At the bottom of the stairs, he turned left toward the furnace, following Martin's directions with mechanical precision. "He's in the basement now, Detective," moving toward the money location. "Copy. Units are moving into final positions. Give us 30 more seconds." Luther knelt beside the furnace and began prying up loose floorboards with a crowbar he'd brought for the purpose. The basement camera provided a clear view as he discovered the plastic bags containing my life savings, exactly where Martin had promised they would be. "Detective Miller, he's found the money. He's handling the bags, counting them." "Perfect. All units, move in now. Mr. Rogers, keep recording, but stay at your location until we give the all clear." Through my phone screen, I watched Luther stuff cash bundles into a backpack, completely unaware that 4 police officers were entering my house through both doors simultaneously. The basement camera captured the moment Luther realized he wasn't alone, his head snapping up as heavy footsteps thundered overhead. "Sacramento police! Drop everything and put your hands where we can see them." Luther's face showed professional resignation rather than surprise. He'd been caught before, knew the routine, understood that resistance would only make things worse. The backpack dropped to the basement floor as his hands rose above his head. "Luther Kane, you're under arrest for attempted burglary, conspiracy, and violation of parole." Detective Miller's voice came through my phone with satisfaction. "Mr. Rogers, suspect is in custody. Phase 1 complete. Remain at your location. Your son should arrive within the next 15 minutes for Phase 2. I drove back toward my house, knowing that justice was finally being served, that 40 years of honest work had been protected, and that the most difficult part still lay ahead. Police cars lined my quiet street like official punctuation marks, their red and blue lights painting my neighborhood in colors of law and consequence. I parked behind Detective Miller's unmarked sedan and walked toward my front door, where Luther Kane sat handcuffed in the back of a patrol car, staring straight ahead with the blank expression of someone calculating prison time. Detective Miller met me at my front steps, her professional demeanor softened by what might have been sympathy. "Mr. Rogers, your surveillance system worked perfectly. We have everything documented. Break-in, theft attempt, recovery of your money. Kane won't be seeing freedom for several years. What about Martin? He should arrive any moment. We'll handle his arrest the same way, by the book, with full documentation." As if summoned by our conversation, Martin's familiar sedan turned the corner onto my street. I watched my son's expression change from casual anticipation to confused alarm as he processed the police vehicles surrounding his childhood home. He parked poorly, half on the sidewalk, and stepped out, looking like someone walking into a nightmare. Martin approached the police perimeter with growing panic, his designer clothes and confident swagger dissolving into the desperate movements of someone realizing they'd been caught. Detective Miller stepped forward to intercept him before he could reach my front door. "Martin Rogers, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit burglary, accessory to attempted theft, and violation of trust." "What?" "No, there's been some mistake." Martin's voice cracked like a teenager's as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "Dad! Dad! Tell them this is wrong." I stepped into his line of sight, and the desperate hope in Martin's eyes died as he saw my calm expression, my lack of surprise at the police presence, my obvious cooperation with the officers who'd arrested his partner. "Dad, how could you do this to me?" The question hung between us like 35 years of failed lessons finally coming due. I looked at my son, handcuffed, humiliated, facing prison time for trying to rob his own father, and felt something I hadn't expected: peace. "How could I do this, Martin? Son, you planned to break into my house and steal everything your mother and I saved over 40 years of marriage. You brought a criminal into our neighborhood, gave him detailed plans of our home, told him exactly when and how to violate the place where you grew up. I thought you'd never find out. You thought wrong." My voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades building things that lasted while watching his son tear down everything of value in his life. You made your choice when you chose Luther Kane over your family. Now you get to live with the consequences. Detective Miller guided Martin toward a second patrol car while reading him his rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Martin twisted back toward me as the car door opened. Dad, please, I'm your son. I made a mistake, but you can't let them do this. Martin, I spent 35 years trying to teach you the difference between right and wrong. Your mother died believing you'd eventually learn those lessons. I stepped closer to the patrol car, close enough to see tears forming in my son's eyes. Today you learned them the hard way. The police car pulled away from my curb, carrying Martin toward booking, arraignment, and whatever justice the courts would provide. I watched until the vehicle disappeared around the corner, then turned back to Detective Miller, who was coordinating the removal of evidence from my basement. Mr. Rogers, we'll need a formal statement, but the preliminary charges are solid. Kane will likely get 3 to 5 years as a repeat offender. Your son, probably less, since this appears to be his first serious offense. I nodded, understanding that legal consequences were only part of what had been resolved today. The larger justice, the protection of everything Ellen and I had built, the validation of principles I'd maintained despite family pressure, that justice was already complete. Detective, I'll provide whatever testimony you need. Both of them made their choices. Now they can face the results, like adults. An hour later, the police cars were gone, my money was back in its basement hiding place, and my house was quiet again. But the silence felt different now. Not empty or lonely, but peaceful. Earned. Monday evening's Sacramento Bee carried the story on page 3. Father's security system foils son's robbery plot. The article described the arrests without sensationalizing the family drama, focusing instead on the professional police work and sophisticated surveillance technology that had made the operation successful. I read the article twice while sitting in my favorite living room chair, Ellen's photograph positioned where I could see her smile while processing how our story had finally reached its conclusion. The newspaper's account was factual, but missed the deeper truth. This hadn't been about technology or police work, but about principles held firm under the ultimate test. Detective Miller called at 4:30 to provide updates on the legal proceedings. Luther Kane had waived his right to trial and accepted a plea bargain for 3 years in state prison. Martin's case would take longer to resolve, but his attorney was already discussing a plea arrangement that would result in 18 months with possibility of parole in 12. Your son wants to see you, Mr. Rogers. He's asked about visiting rights once he's processed into the system. Detective, I appreciate everything you and your department have done, but Martin made his choice about our relationship when he decided to rob me. I don't see that changing because he got caught. I understand, sir. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned. After hanging up, I walked down to the basement to check on my money one final time. The loose floorboards were exactly as I'd left them, the plastic bags intact and undisturbed, despite Luther's brief handling. $43,000 in cash, earned through 4 decades of honest work, remained safe because I'd been willing to protect it from my own child. Standing in the basement where Martin had first learned about our family's savings, I felt Ellen's presence more strongly than I had since her funeral. Her voice echoed in my memory. Arnold, if you give him everything without effort, he'll never learn to value work. She'd been right about tough love, right about boundaries, right about the long-term consequences of enabling bad behavior. Ellen, I did what needed to be done, I said aloud to the empty basement. Our son chose his path, and I chose mine. Justice was served. The basement stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed back to the main floor, leaving the money secure in its hiding place and the past secure in its lessons. In the kitchen, I brewed fresh coffee and settled back into my evening routine, checking the locks, reviewing tomorrow's schedule, living the peaceful life that came from making difficult decisions correctly. Mrs. Patterson waved from her garden as I checked my front door, her gesture carrying the same neighborly warmth it always had. The community respected what I'd done, protecting my home, cooperating with law enforcement, refusing to be victimized by family manipulation. Sometimes doing right required doing hard things. At 7 o'clock, I turned off the surveillance cameras I'd installed to catch my son. Their purpose had been served, justice had been delivered, and normal life could resume. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight I could rest, knowing that Ellen's principles had prevailed, that honest work was protected, and that even the most painful betrayals could be answered with righteous action. The house settled around me with familiar sounds of security and peace. My money was safe, my conscience was clear, and my son was learning the lessons I'd spent 35 years trying to teach him. Sometimes the hardest love was the truest love, even when it led to handcuffs and prison cells. Ellen would have been proud. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.